Ангеліна Кріхелі, The Return of First Love. Read by Жевнір Alexandra. I stood in line for coffee at the supermarket near my home. Tired after a long day, my thoughts were wandering somewhere far away, forming the annual report. Suddenly, my side vision caught a familiar silhouette. Something immediately trembled inside. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't be mistaken. It was Andrew. My Andrew. It had been 20 years since our last date. After that, the world had fallen apart for me, and I still hadn't found a clear answer to his disappearance. It seemed that all that useful drama, first love, jealousy, tears, all long forgotten and left in the distant past. At least I tried hard to leave him there. In my youth, he was my only meaning, our story I lived, our dreams, our arguments, those silent moments when we sat next to each other and it seemed like there was no one else in the world. Yet everything worked out the way it was supposed to. But the second our gazes met at the register, I realized that it wasn't quite like that after all. He recognized me too, and smiled. That smile of his, the one that exposed the slightly uneven row of teeth that I knew so well. I felt a wave of memories wash over me. He approached, and my body reacted instantly, as if remembering that forgotten shiver with which I used to wait for his timid touch. Lena, is it really you? He said my name in a way that sent shivers down my spine, as if he'd kept it in his heart all this time but hadn't dared to say it. How naive I was. Andrew, hi! I felt like I couldn't even smile normally. It was amazing how the meeting I'd once dreamed of now made me afraid to give away my true feelings. Surely he must have been married for a long time and happily married. So he met a former classmate. I doubt he cherished our past encounters in his memory as much as I did. Then he simply wouldn't have disappeared so suddenly. We paid for our purchases. I smiled, glancing at his basket. There was a carton of the exact same coffee I'd bought. It was strange. So many years has passed. We've changed. The world has changed. There are new products and brands. And we still think in the same way and look in the same direction. Andrew looked at me silently, as if trying to understand what I was thinking. And after a pause, he suggested, maybe we should go somewhere. Let's have a chat over coffee. Would you let me take your number? The question sounded simple, but there was a restraint and an uncertain request in it, as if he were gently tugging at an invisible thread that had connected us all this time without breaking even after years. I hesitated, feeling a strange resistance inside. My mind was desperately telling me this was all a mistake. Why should I let him back into my life, even for one cup of coffee, for a couple short lines on the phone. But something in his gaze, that mix of awkwardness, anticipation, and maybe even regret, overrode it. I was curious. Who was he now, this adult Andrew? What kind of person was standing in front of me now? Okay. I was surprised to hear my voice sound soft and even a little warmer than I had expected. He pulled out his phone and handed it to me, and I carefully entered my number as if I was afraid that this small action would set off a chain of events that I wouldn't be able to control. I remembered my friend's words that life is full of signs, and the main thing is to recognize them in time. I missed her. I hastily pulled away and returned the phone, but suddenly I saw the date on the screen. The date and months were the same as the date of our first shy kiss at the school gate. That coincidence made me stop, as if an invisible door had opened at that very moment. We walked outside, pacing in silence. Close but cautious, like old friends who suddenly realized they didn't know each other that well. Each of us chose our words carefully, weighing in each phrase, trying not too hard. And when we reached the small cafe on the corner, I stopped, staring at his front door. The doubt suspended in the air, lingering like honey, suddenly came over me again. Why am I doing this? Who do I really want out of this meeting? Andrew grabbed the doorknob, and I realized I had one last chance to turn around and walk away. To remind myself that the past was better left in the past, that we were no longer the same people we'd once been, and that we probably couldn't understand each other anymore. But as I pondered, the door opened and he gestured for me to come in, looking so attentive and calm, as if he'd been waiting for this moment for years. We sat at a small table in the corner of the cafe, separated from the other customers as if on purpose, as if they had created this separate world for us where neither rules nor time applied. Andrew put his elbows on the table and his fingers drummed nervously on the rim of his cup, as they used to do when he was worried, a sign I recognized at once. We talked about everything and nothing at the same time. We remembered school, friends, who got married, who had children, and who had sadly passed away. Talking about the past did not seem ridiculous, as it usually happens when you meet old acquaintances. They start getting nostalgic, and you demonstrate with all your might that you're in a big hurry to get things done, just because you don't want to dive into the business of bygone days. Now, on the contrary, it was as if I saw in him someone new, but at the same time, the same Andrew who remained my first true love. How are you? How has your life turned out? He asked cautiously, but without averting his gaze. I knew he wanted to know more than just the formalities. There was a strange, nervous warmth inside. You don't sit across from the man you once thought was the only one in your life and try to find words for such simple things. "There's no way," I replied, smiling shyly. "I'm alone." He frowned slightly, and I suddenly felt uncomfortable under that gaze. I lowered my eyes, not waiting him to see my emotions. Somehow, he made the truth of loneliness seem so loud, so sharp. But the truth was even worse for me. I never let go of this man, never forgot him. Even in those moments when I thought I had gotten over it, that I was free, that little piece of the past continued to live inside me. Like an old wound that heals but never fully heals. Maybe that's why I didn't let anyone really get close, couldn't be a part of anyone's life, because a part of mine had belonged to him all along. I looked at him furtively, trying to understand what he was living now, what was left of the man I loved. It might well turn out that he was a different person now. That thought made me sad, and I asked, "What about you? How did things work out for now?" "I was married," he answered briefly, and then he was silent. I noticed that his fingers clutched the cup convulsively, as if he were holding something that might slip out. Apparently, the details were painful to him, or he didn't want to go into an explanation. I tried to read his face, looking for signs of pain or maybe regret, but he looked away, and I realized he still didn't want to let me fully into his life. And then something shook inside me, cold and quiet. Maybe it had been like the 20 years ago. Maybe he just didn't know how to open up, didn't know what was like to let someone get it too close. Felt a kind of reticence. The years apart had given us the freedom to talk about many things, but they hid some intangible layer of pain and regret, something that lurked. I couldn't bear to ask, why was it that we were lost back then? You were the most important thing to me. You knew that. He lowered his gaze, remained silent for a long time, then quietly answered that perhaps he was afraid of his love, of its power. Afraid he couldn't keep me close. Afraid he wouldn't give me what I deserved. He looked at me the way he had then, only his gaze was more mature. Sizzling, but it was more sober, calm, as if testing to see if I could forgive him the years later. I listened to myself, realizing there was nothing to forgive him for. I smiled softly in response to this unspoken question. And then all the pain rose up inside me, all the strength of my feelings, all the things that had once seemed to have subsided. I felt like I was being torn apart. I wanted so badly to tell him that I was willing to risk it again, that he still meant too much to me. If that situation happened again, would you leave me again? I asked, not hiding the disappointment in my voice. It was important for me to understand, because that question could be the secret to my loneliness all these years. Maybe there was something wrong with me. We were silent. Perhaps he had asked himself that question too, but had never found an answer. You know, Andrew said quietly, lean a little closer. Why don't we take a walk along the embankment? Remember, we used to go there every Saturday after school. For a moment I thought he was joking. 20 years later, and he makes it sound like yesterday. As if he believes that when we go back to the same waterfront, we'll find something we lost long ago. I tried to imagine what it would look like from the outside, two adults giving in to the strange impulse to go to the place where they'd once made their useful plans and shared their most secret desires. But there were no irony in his eyes. He was waiting for an answer, looking at me so intently, as if for the first time in a long time someone in this world was deciding something really important for him. He remembered. After all these years, it was as if there was no indifference on his part, no disdain for the feelings that bound us together. I would have liked to hide the fact that those memories were as dear to me as I was to the fact that I still, mentally returning to the past, always saw the two of us on the very embankment, but I couldn't. Do you remember? I whispered, leaning toward him as if I were afraid that the memory would fade if I spoke any louder. Of course, he smiled and nodded, and there was something incredibly honest and tender in that smile. You don't forget something like that, Lena. I was confused. It was unexpected. He knew how easy it was to disarm me with that, as if he'd touched an invisible string, so that my carefully constructed walls suddenly began to crumble one by one. It was like everything inside turned upside down, and suddenly I felt like the same girl who'd once trusted him completely. All right, let's go, I replied quietly, trying to hide the way my lips trembled and forcing myself to stay calm. But when he smiled even wider, I felt that my agreement was really important to him. We stood up in silence, paid for our coffee, and walked out into the evening air, cool but surprisingly fresh. Andrew walked beside me, barely touching my arm, as if checking if he could get closer again, as he had done then. And that touch made me dizzy inside. It was so simple, but real, familiar, still desirable. We walked slowly along the embankment, as we had done 20 years ago. But now everything was different, intense, Every look and touch carried the weight of the years that had passed. From time to time, Andrew turned to me, looking at me as if he wanted to say something. Then again he kept silent, as if he was afraid to destroy the fragile atmosphere that had arisen between us. We were silent, but I felt that his thoughts were close to mine, as if he knew what I was thinking. I finally made up my mind and looked at him directly, trying to read the answers to the questions that were bothering me on his face. He grinned, as if to say, "So what if we make a mistake?" And I realized I was thinking it myself, that we have a right to follow our feelings, even if it's for a little while, even if nothing else. He touched my hand gently, and the touch made my insides feel like they were on fire, spilling worms. It was a silent signal, a silent request, an invitation. We were free, adults, and no one could tell us what was the right or wrong. Only ourselves. We have the right to happiness, to the very happiness we once dreamed of in our youth, but now more consciously and maybe a little more cautiously. "Shall we go?" he asked, and in that question I heard more than a simple invitation to follow him. I felt his desire to be with me, if only for a few hours, completely, without looking back. I nodded mesmerized, and we headed toward his house, again in complete silence. Only now it was as if the silence was filled with sounds, the pounding of our hearts, barely audible breathing, warm memories of what had once been so important to both of us. Once we were at his place, everything that had been holding us back vanished. He pulled me to him as if he feared that this time I would disappear. His kiss was greedy, demanding, and his hands were so warm they seemed like they could keep me warm for years to come. In that kiss, I felt the passion I'd been stifling for years, the tenderness that had remained in my teenage memories. We both knew the night was just for the two of us, with no promises or commitments. But it contained everything we hadn't had time to live then. I lay next to him, feeling his warmth slowly creeping under my skin, as if trying to push out all the fears and doubts that had lived inside me for years. His hand slid gently down my back, and that touch was the only way he could express what he hadn't had time to say out loud. Drowned in the moment like still water with hidden currents, they explored each other in the morning rays that came through the half-closed curtains, flooding the room with soft, barely perceptible light. "You know," Andrew said, his voice soft and calm, but with subtle tension of a man about to say something important, "I'm glad we met at the supermarket. Although that meeting probably wasn't so coincidental." She frowned, but she didn't pull away, continuing to listen attentively, sensing that there was something hidden in his words, waiting to be discovered. Andrew smiled playfully, his gaze remaining serious and focused. There was something in him that touched me to the core. When I moved to his neighborhood a few months ago, he continued, I've never expected to see you. That day was no different than any other day. I was just shopping and suddenly I saw you. I couldn't believe it at first. I thought it was just a coincidence, that maybe I imagined it, but no, it was you. I huddled closer, trying to see the painfully familiar facial expression, soaking up every word like a sponge. And then he paused, as if choosing his words. I didn't dare approach, he admitted. I was scared, Lena. I was afraid that you were already married, that you were doing well. I was afraid that maybe it was only important to me, and that for you I was just a shadow from the past, nothing more. The words seemed so frank that I felt something inside me tremble. I'd never thought he could be afraid. That brave, determined man I always remembered him to be. The one who had always seemed so sure of himself suddenly revealed himself to be vulnerable, as insecure, as vulnerable as I was. What did you do? I raised up on my elbow, looking at him with curiosity, tenderness, and some surprise. I started going in there every night. He grinned, but his smile was a little embarrassed. I hoped to see you again. Every time I walked past that supermarket, it was like someone was leading me back, like there was another chance that we'd cross paths again. My heart beat faster as I listened to him struggle to find the words, remembering it all. He spoke as if every detail had been burned into his memory, as if those small memories had become something precious to him. And then you showed up, he continued, and all my fears turned out to be foolish. I realized I couldn't just walk away without taking a step toward you. Not this time. I ran my fingers along his cheek, looking into his eyes, which read the sincere, inexorable joy that now I was near. I remained silent for a long time, feeling a strange and tender excitement building. His words, so honest, so frank, had awakened something in me that I had been hiding for myself for years. A feeling I kept carefully hidden, convincing myself that it had faded into the past. But now, when he was lying next to me, listening to my breathing, looking into my eyes so carefully and softly, it was impossible to keep that secret. Andrew, I said quietly, running my fingers along the line of his shoulder, you have no idea how glad I am that I met you then. But I have something to confess to you. He tensed, but he didn't pull away, didn't try to interrupt. He just stared at me, waiting. In that moment, I realized that he was ready to hear whatever was on my mind. That he wouldn't be deterred by my sincerity or my vulnerability. I've loved you all this time, I whispered, feeling the words burn on my tongue. After we broke up, At first I tried to find out how you were doing, even asking mutual friends. Like I was looking for proof that you were doing well, that you weren't in pain. Or maybe you were looking for me, because you disappeared too suddenly. But the more I heard, the harder it got, and at some point I forbade myself to even think about you. I was silent, watching his reaction, afraid that his frankness might frighten him. But he didn't look away, and there was no judgment or doubt in his eyes, only deep, warm understanding. I tried to move on. She continued a little more firmly. I tried to find someone to fill the void you left behind. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't really love another person. I convinced myself that I had let you go, that you were just a warm memory, but yesterday when I saw you, it all came back, Andrew. And I realized it hadn't gone away. I've just learned to live with it, like an invisible scar that doesn't hurt, but you can feel it. The weather, the fatigue. With those words, it was as if I'd shed the weight I'd been carrying around for years. I could see it in his eyes. He was here, beside me, ready to share this burden with me. Just as he was ready to share this morning light with me, this sudden closeness that we both almost lost. Andrew smiled when he heard my confession, and some serene, quiet joy flashed in his eyes. But when I talked about the past, about how things had changed, not only in our relationship, but in my life as a whole since he'd left, he suddenly looked away. I saw his smile fade, and the fingers on my arm tensed slightly. You know, I continued, feeling that if I didn't say it now, I might be never there. After you left, it wasn't just you that I lost. Soon my friend, with whom we were like sisters, suddenly disappeared. She went somewhere, and no one could ever tell me why. Those days were too hard for me. He was listening, but his gaze was averted, and for a moment I thought the words caused him a vague uneasiness. Maybe it hurt him to remember that period, or maybe he felt guilty for leaving me alone, but Andrew didn't say anything. Instead of words, he rose smoothly, gently touched my hand, as if apologizing for his silence, and went to the kitchen. I remained lying here, feeling the last shadows of resentment slowly dissolving. Soon the smell of toasted bread and fresh coffee wafted me. He acted as if caring could speak louder for him than any words could. There was something warm and simple about it, something I'd missed for so long. When he called me to the table, I smiled as I watched Andrew carefully set the plates down and pour the coffee, as if there hadn't been those years of silence between us. Only moments of intimacy that had finally caught up with us. Lena. His voice was deep and a little unsure, as if he was trying the right words before he decided to continue. It may sound sudden, but I'm scared to think that I might lose you again. I don't want to wait any longer. He paused, looking me carefully in the eyes. Move in with me. Why wait? We've spent so much time trying to find each other again. It's unlikely that life will give us another such unique chance to be happy, together. His words made my heart squeeze, and I felt a wave of tenderness that was unstoppable. Even yesterday I didn't know what would happen next, but now his proposal sounded like the most natural continuation of our story, as if life itself was finally giving us permission to start over. I stared into his eyes, feeling the words rise up out of the depths. The answer was so simple and natural that I didn't hesitate for a moment. "Yes, Andrew, I'll move," I said quietly but confidently and smiled, seeing his face light up with joy all those words. He hugged me gustily as if he was afraid that in the next moment I would disappear, as if my words were the answer to his deepest desire. The move was a little more chaotic than I had imagined, but Andrew helped as much as he could. He took care of every little thing, from big boxes to cute little things like bringing my favorite flowers and the plate I'd grown accustomed to over the years. He cheered me up, joked with me, and sometimes just watched silently as I stacked books and old letters, touching things with care. It was as if we were both absorbed in this preparation for our new life together. The landlord, of course, was surprised at the haste with which I was leaving the apartment, but she didn't object what she heard that I didn't plan to collect the deposit. And I didn't give myself a second's pause lest I start doubting. Not to ask myself, like a mature person, what I was even doing. One day, when I had already started unpacking, he said he needed to stop by the office for a couple of hours. Immersed in catching up on his happy relationship with me, he completely forgot about work. Thankfully, the small business was running smoothly in his absence. But the work on the project urgently needed to be finished, and I just nodded, decided that I could handle the streamlining myself. Surprisingly, I was able to negotiate time off at work, and those few days now belonged to just me, to us. It's a time when you don't think about anything but new beginnings, and every moment has a special meaning. I was just putting the books on the shelf in his office, imagining how he'd looked at them when I left to run errands or cook in the kitchen. That strange coziness that enveloped our everyday life already in my imagination seemed to take shape. Suddenly the doorbell rang. I froze, feeling a slight excitement mixed with curiosity. Who could it be? Andrusha didn't say that we were expecting guests. With a blissful smile of peace, swam towards the door, with the back of my palm brushing my bands of my forehead. Together with the move, I started a general cleaning. Out of habit, I opened the door without looking. Probably my favorite forgot some documents. I froze in front of her, surprised to recognize her best friend from school, Marina. "You?" I asked, dumbfounded, automatically stepping aside to let her in. "How did you find me?" I don't know why I thought that after all these years, Marinka would be looking for me. Maybe it was inspired by Andrew's revelation, What if fate decided to reward me for years of mental anguish and brought back into my life all those whom I cherished? Tell me that you work for a cleaning company and in Andrew's apartment just cleaned for payment. Nervously or asked or ordered Marina nervously or ordered me to the sofa. Because otherwise I'll have to pull your hair out for getting into bed with my husband. She relaxed on the light-colored couch I'd just finished washing. I looked confusedly into the face of my absolutely confident school friend, and she fixed her gaze on Andrusha's white t-shirt, which I had pulled on myself with his permission this morning. I always dreamt of wearing his huge t-shirt at home, which would keep for me all day the smell of my favorite man, the warmth of his body and soul. What are you talking about? I didn't sound too sure, closing the door and walking back into the living room. On the way, I threw a rag into a bucket of water, pulled a chair for myself, and sat down opposite the unexpected and now not too desirable guest. Do you want to see the marriage certificate? Marina grinned really brightly painted lips. I shook my head negatively, feeling that I was starting to vomit on a nervous basis. Some kind of vaudeville, I muttered. Wait, Andrusha said that he was married, but now lives alone, recalled joyfully. So you ex-wife, right? Asked with hope. Marina again nasty grin, not taken down from the triumphant look. This guy will say even more than that, just to get you into bed. I couldn't do it when I was young. I realized with horror that she believes that what she said, and Marina almost never lied. She, like me, always has everything written on her face. So even trying to deceive is pointless. And yes, at the time of his sudden disappearance, I was still stubbornly a virgin. Had he left then because I was too unavailable? I wondered bitterly what would have changed if I'd given it to our mutual desire for intimacy. Would he have stayed with me? He wouldn't. Marinka shook her head, softening a little. She still seemed to understand me too well. He wouldn't, because I was already pregnant with his child. This time her tone wasn't triumphant, but her gaze was piercing and painful. You have child? My son is 19 this year, she nodded. I swallowed the lump in my throat, staring at her through the throat of tears. If that was true, I'd better never meet him again. Why would he do that to me? Was it to make up for what he'd missed out on when I was younger? But Andrew seemed so sincere. Leon, why did you come again? Marinka asked bitterly, exposing her own suffering in front of me. Obviously, not everything is not so smooth in their marriage. She looked somewhere behind my back. I turned around wearily, finding a vague silhouette of Andrew in front of me. Tell me better, why did you come? He asked my wife rather stiffly, touching my shoulder in a gesture of silent support. And I desperately wanted to throw off his palm, which now pressed so hard. I guess what Marinka told you, immediately explained to me, feeling my tension. But she's my ex-wife. Legally quite real, snored the woman across from me, who seemed to be a stranger. It's only a matter of time, Andrew objected, and I felt like an extra link in their dialogue. Maureen, you know that I love Lena. All these years I've loved her. It didn't stop you from sleeping with me. The ironic smirk never left my classmate's lips. Even when that fool was waiting for you to go out with her. Are you jealous of her chastity? What a word! What's there to be jealous of? She snored. 20 years of total loneliness while she waited for you? You asshole! What does she have in her life? It was beyond me to endure their conversation. I mentally counted to 10 so that I could pull myself together and not burst into tears. I wiped my tears and looked carefully at the clearly offended and unhappy Marina. A happy woman does not need to wear bright makeup and wear frank outfits to leave the house during the day. She does not need to torture her legs with such high heels and such tight dresses. She doesn't have the haunted look in her eyes or the barely concealed anger in her smile. What if she saved me from a huge, fatal mistake by replacing me? It's not hard to calculate that she was already pregnant when Andrew and I were still dating. Is that why you disappeared then? I asked, interrupting. Andrew looked at me in surprise, as if only now he remembered my presence, so was absorbed in another fight. Confusedly nodded. I was afraid to traumatize you, I explained hastily. Knowing your delicate nature, I said. She put up her hand, calling for silence. And you left because of this? Demanding asked Marina. She blinked, taken aback by my imperious tone. I don't care if you both couldn't be there. I rose from my seat with determination, determined to get out of the room that was beginning to weigh on my psyche. Too much passed in 1 square meter of space. Lena, wait! Andrew frightened, while Marina silently and with interest watched what was happening. Now, you wait, I exclaimed, poking him in the chest with my finger. And listen to me carefully. I never, do you hear me? I would never have decided to have a relationship with you, knowing what you both did to me back then. And I wish the ugly truth had come out sooner, because then it would have been easier for me to let you go. I would not have looked for fault in myself, did not blame myself, did not cry for years in the pillow, wondering how my favorite Andrew and what happened to my best friend. Marina shamefully lowered her head. Order surprised me with this gesture, but I was so hard that other people's emotions ceased to matter. And thank you, Marina, that at least now you have the courage to open my eyes. Andrew shook his head, realizing what I'm saying all this. Lenочка, I'm sorry. I was going to tell you just a little later. I filed for divorce a long time ago. But you won't get it. Marinka jumped up, visibly reviving. You decide that without me. I'm washing my hands. She raised her palms in confirmation of the words, pulled the kerchief she had tied for cleaning off her head and threw it carelessly into the corner. "I'll send someone for my things." Thankfully, I didn't have time to unpack almost anything, she said, already putting on sneakers in the hallway. "Lena, don't give up, please," pleadingly said Andrew, coming out next while Marina went into the kitchen with a masterly look. Actually, she had every right to manage in the house of her lawful husband. But what did I have the right, a naive fool who believed in the gift of fate? "No, Andrew," gently removed his hand, taken from the shelf bag and car keys. "First, deal with your wife." "You said you love me," he whispered, following me to the door. My heart clenched painfully in my chest, and I pressed my lips together until it hurt. "And that's only my business," I replied sharply, but I couldn't resist adding, "at least for the time being." Then resolutely pulled the handle down and stepped onto the landing, leaving Andrew in the past again. Did I want him to catch up with me and convince me to stay? Oh yes, more than anything. But then I would have agreed and lost all self-respect. Did I hope that my beloved would solve his family issues as soon as possible and finalize the divorce proceedings, unless he lied? I wanted it madly. But would I be able to accept him again, to let him into my soul after so many years of pain and such a grand and massive deception? Once on the street, I thought it was for the best to give up the rented apartment. After all, it's not far from Andrew's place. But to see him, to know that he was near, and to be so far away at the same time, I couldn't stand it. Snowflakes whirling around the yard slowly gathered the company of white friends, covering the ground with a dense white cover. It seems that New Year's miracle will not happen this year. I'm not going to put up the tree. In a few days I need to find a place to live, because it is absolutely unacceptable from my side to embarrass my old parents. Their apartment is tiny as it is. And then there's me. And they don't need to know about Andrew. Without that turned with me while I came to recover from a sudden separation 20 years ago. I raised the collar of my coat, which was too light for this weather, and hurried to the store to buy my parents' favorite treats and call a cab. A few days passed like a blur. Father didn't ask about anything. My mom tried to ask, but she ran into a deafening wall of silence and gave up too. I found a new apartment surprisingly quickly. Small, but in a good neighborhood, not far from work. And how much do I need on my own? The thought stunned me again. But you can't move until January 1st. Then, exactly, I'll buy a small tabletop Christmas tree, the kind they make out of twins nowadays. I'll cover it from all sides with sweet-smelling tangerines and colored gift boxes. Let the parents rejoice. And in January, I'll start sorting out the things that Andrews flatly refused to give the movers without my personal presence. And now I will order a pizza and treat myself to a new comedy movie. Thankfully, they shoot a lot of them for the New Year holidays. I shuddered when I heard the doorbell ring, inwardly squeezed from the flashed association with the arrival of Marina. I went open the door. "Who?" I'll ask now. Always. in order not to inadvertently let any more misfortune into the house. "Lena, open, please," a familiar voice asked softly, and I clenched my eyes tightly, afraid to believe it was true. "Go away, Andrew," I said, leaning against the door with my whole body, as if I could hug him like that. "Go to Marina." "You don't know anything," he mumbled stubbornly from behind the door. I could tell from the voice that he was pressing his forehead against hers. "If I found out, would the lies of the past be cancelled?" I asked with a chuckle. Andrew was silent for a few minutes, and I could not find the strength to go to the room. "Not cancelled, but it will change," he said deftly. "Open the door, please." I couldn't resist. I opened the door, but I didn't offer to come in. Andrew handed me a bouquet of my favorite chrysanthemums and a thick paper bag for bidding, obviously. I obediently accepted the offerings, but I did not move from my seat. Marina and I had only had it once. "Spare me the details," I grimaced painfully. "It's important, Len. I was drunk. We were seeing a comrade off to the army with the guys. Marina worked as a waitress in the cafe where we were seeing him off." I nodded. I listened to myself. No, I didn't feel any better. She showed up a while later to tell me she was pregnant, and I ran away, I concluded. "From both of us." He nodded. "Ran away, I confess, and she found..." He said and looked at me expectantly, as if accusing me of not looking. I raised an eyebrow in surprise. "And you got married." What was I supposed to do? He flared up instantly. "If I came to you with such a confession, would you forgive me?" I had no answer. Then and how I was afraid of losing him. And I lost him both times. There he is, standing in front of me, looking guilty, waiting to forgive me. And I feel a sudden emptiness. I react for him, fear him, love him, and hate him. But it's like I'm under anesthesia, like I'm watching from afar. "Will you forgive me now?" he asked hopefully. I put the flowers and treats on the shoe cabinet in the hallway and took the doorknob. "I need time. I need to think," I answered honestly, preparing to close the door. "Lena." I put my foot up at the last moment, leaving the door ajar. "Just not for long. Please, not 20 years again, because I can't stand that long without you." I nodded, closed the door, and looked at the calendar. It's so strange. 20 years ago, he disappeared on this exact day. What would happen to us now? But I still didn't have an answer. This story is complete. But tell me, what choice would you make? Write about it in comments. Let's hear it.